Hey, thanks for joining me, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. This is a post talking about how one can validate oneself, and the context within which I'm producing this is that I want to start a new channel called Awakening Africans, and the meaning of that title is twofold. First of all, if I can, by my content, kickstart an awakening of ideas and ways of being and how to do things, thank heavens, that's a great bonus. But not only that, the second meaning is that it's an opportunity for Africans to actually reveal how awakened they are. And I think it's particularly important now because we are coming to a time of great changes. My country of birth, Ghana, is going through the most horrendous economic difficulties at the present time, based on the fact that basically the cedi, her currency, has nosedived. And the government is now knocking on the door of the IMF. Now, historically, that's not been a good look because the consequences that follow are usually pretty, should we say, stark and somewhat unpleasant. So the time for us to grasp the nettle and think about our future is now. We got differential results all across the continent. Kenya's got disputed elections, which are being thrashed out right now in the courts. Then on the other hand, you got Rwanda, which is getting ready to export its home-built VW cars, which she'll be able to export around the world. Of course, South Africa keeps going through conniptions and paroxysms of internal strife and conflict. And of course, the Congo, our wealthiest nation on the continent, continues to struggle to come to terms with herself and how she can leverage and manage her wealth. Uganda's just discovered, they say, 12 or 13 trillion uh, 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 tons, trillion dollars worth of gold. And of course, everybody's asking, what difference is that going to make? After all, Nigeria came out with a lot of oil. It's facing difficulties now. Ghana herself has discovered loads of oil, but has it really made a difference? So I'm thinking that it's time for us to be ourselves, become who we can really be. And that's what this post is all about. First question you have to ask yourself as an African in 2022 is, who are you? I mean, who are you really? If I take my example, I'm a child that was born kind of after independence. Um, by the age of 7.5, 8, I was in an English boarding school, very American. If it was London, it would have been one thing, but I was up there in a place called the Lake District. Google it on a map. And I always, later on, telling the story, used to say that Black people hadn't been invented up there. So you can imagine that owing to the colonial relationships, a lot of Africans have had their native rooted values, attitudes, and beliefs overlain by those of the former colonial controllers of the entire continent. And so, kind of in a decision making situation, a lot of Africans are, practically speaking, almost schizophrenic in the way they present, in who they are, um, what values they hold, what they really believe in. Are they just aping the systems of the West uh, to be validated by people outside, and so on? And this is why it is so vital that we all learn how to validate ourselves rather than be the person that somebody else in their own interests want us to be. So the first thing about self-validation, in my experience, is that you've got to be true to yourself. And to be true to yourself, you've got to identify what the overlays of other people's thinking is. These overlays manifest on a personal basis. First is social programming. We all come from a particular family. We all come from a particular group of people, kingdoms, I call them. Other people call them tribes. We all come from different kingdoms, which have been amalgamated into these now sovereign states, say like Ghana or Kenya or South Africa or the Congo or whatever. And within our families, starting from the get-go, we have been primed to think in a certain way. We have been socialized to think in a certain way. And that priming, that socialization itself has been deeply influenced by several hundred years of colonial influence from outside. And this manifests in our religiosity, the kind of religions we practice, how we practice those religions, in the way we handle instruments of state and means of state like democracy, like multi-party government, and so on. All of these things have been influenced by the overlays owing to our background. So the only way a person can identify and decide who they really are is to get in touch with their spiritual center. That spiritual center is like the fresh water of one's very existence. It derives from our connection to our original source, the creator source, which underlies all and sustains all universal phenomena. This self is unblemished. You can take it on that level. On another level, it's not just the programming that is causing us to not know particularly who is making the decision that they're making at the present time. It's not just what our society will validate us for being like. It's not just a question of following the herd. Sometimes the influences are entities and spiritual forces that attach to our being. Of course, these are completely invisible. They won't teach you about this in secondary school, not even in university, not even if you do PhDs. They won't talk about your spirituality. But as we go along in the world, it becomes more and more apparent that our mind-body complex can be hugely influenced by spiritual entities and life forms. Now, they are just as difficult to identify and recognize as the programming which, for example, I was placed under to learn foreign languages, to be functional or good in mathematics, to become well educated, to know as much as I could about the rest of the world. And the admonition wasn't really there for me to deep dive into my own culture. So when you're in a decision-making situation, you wonder to yourself, which of the tetes, in my case, is functioning here? The same will apply to you. Is it your programming? Is it external and sometimes hugely malevolent spiritual entities, life forms, and so on, which are attaching to your life? Or is it the real you? I'll tell you this. To self-validate, you will need to get in touch with the real you, because the real you is solid, sure, and constant. And there are two characteristics about this real you. The thing is, it has a kind of inbuilt admonition to do no harm, not to yourself or to others. And when you're revealing that, you can see that that moral compass is very, very strong within your life. The moment you come to a moral compass guided by your ego, your greed, your animosity, and so on, you know you stepped outside of the real you. And that is the only way you can rise above the social programming, the familial programming, the cultural programming, not all of which is really reflecting your true self and your true being, because all of those programs are bribable. They are all run by the ego, which says, number one first, that is me, which is absolutely contrary to the notion of do no harm. So a lot of people talk about religion, and actually religion has often become a matter of politics and economics. It's got nothing to do with who you really, really are, or how to reveal who you really, really are. And so the way to tap that true self, overcoming all of these overlays, which we all have, is that you will need a spiritual practice of some kind that accesses that. Now, I'm agnostic about which spiritual practice you prefer, or which spiritual practice you choose. There are those who do yoga. There are those who do other practices. There are those who practice Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. Of course, I should have mentioned, first of all, traditional African religions. You will need a spiritual practice to beef you up. Now, if you haven't got one, this isn't a problem. Revealing your true self isn't something you can do with your head. It doesn't matter how many years you spend in education. In fact, the more time you spend in education being based mostly on the left-hand side of the brain, which deals with things like iterative processes, logic, reason, calculation, and so on and so forth. You just won't have enough. You don't have the processing power to process all of that, to identify what is really real and what is being presented to you as a good idea by what is essentially your alternative self, which is the ego. It could be a demonic entity that's programming you to do these things. The point is, it's so close to you. In Buddhism, they have an expression. It says that your eyebrows are the closest things to your eyes, but nobody can see their own eyebrows. This is a similar problem. So you have to find the spiritual practice that will unlock your true essence, your true self. Now, when you do this, something happens. Your sense of time will change. When you reveal your true self, you won't say things like, oh, I'm too old to change, or, oh, this situation is too hopeless to change, or it's always been like this. What on earth am I doing even thinking things can change? Because that is the left-hand brain controlled, egocentrically based, linear time reliant form of reasoning. And it is one way of knowing you are absolutely not tapping your true self. The moment you tap into your true self, time becomes meaningless. You realize that now is in itself an eternity. You realize that it's got nothing to do with your age. It's got a lot to do with your essential awareness and creativity. And as I mentioned, creativity, you discover that when you become yourself, everything about your life is about creation. When you're not yourself, everything about life is about what somebody else did to you or how oppressive certain forces are. I'm not saying they can't be oppressive. I'm not saying that history hasn't proven that there aren't some extremely oppressive forces out there. But when you tap yourself, your courage pops up. Your mentality changes completely. You start to think in terms of, I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. It's a completely different mindset. And to achieve that, we each must seek a spiritual practice that releases who we are. Once we release who we are, what you do doesn't matter, isn't judged by the metrics. The metrics of 15 people agree with this idea, so it must be the right one. It's got nothing to do with it. When you're in touch with yourself in a minority of one, you know what is right and you do what is right. It's as simple as that. In fact, the Buddha, Jesus Christ, our greatest sages in our own history, our ancestors, could not have been who they were if they hadn't been able to tap that spiritual identity, that true self, which trumps all the programming that is overlaid by years of life in your family, your upbringing, by your, by your nuclear and your extended family, the geopolitics of the world, and so on and so forth. So that's how you learn to self-validate. And that's how you know that it's the real you, not the money-grubbing, bribe-seeking, fame-seeking, egocentric, I'm number one and the devil take the hindmost self, which so many of us manifest. By the way, what I say about Africans is exactly true of every other person if they are human beings, but our context here is Africa. So I hope this is useful. Please share your comments, and also please share this video, and please subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much for your time.